이번 영상에서는 해외에서 94만 조회수를 기록하며 아주 큰 사랑을 받은 매매법 강의 내용을 공유드리고자 하는데요. 이것은 아주 근본적이고 핵심적으로 모든 투자자들이 알아야 하는 중요한 내용들을 꼭 눌러 담고 있기 때문에 꼭 공유를 드리고 싶었어요. 끝까지 시청해보시면 절대 아깝지 않은 시간이 될 것이라 자신있게 말씀드릴게요. 자, 그럼 바로 시작해볼게요.
So when we're looking at this price action, what do we see? We see a lot of indecision. We see an area where the sellers stepped in and an area where the buyers were stepping in. So we had a range developed. What we classify a range, it can go to the top of the range, it can come to the bottom of the range, but then we have a consolidation that occurs. And you can see the buyers tighten up and the sellers tighten up. We have a little bit of a what looks like a range consolidation breakout that occurs up here, but it doesn't clear the range. So now all we're thinking of is if this comes down and gets below the low of this consolidation, we can look for a trade to the downside. So our number one trade, the first consolidation break trade that we could look for would be a consolidation breakout either above the high of this level or below the low of this level, kind of outside of our blue lines. If we're taking a straightforward consolidation breakout trade, we're paying attention to the price action, we're seeing the selling pressure build up, we can enter if there is a full close below that range. If that occurs, then our stop, based on the price action, based on the technical analysis, would be up above the highs of the range. So we can get in right here on that candle, and our stop is above the highs of the range. We would risk accordingly. There's another option, though, and that other option would be to trade a break and retest. So that would be price action that breaks the range, but we notice how choppy that range is. When the range is that choppy, we oftentimes will get a retest of that range, of the backside of the range. And then we want to take the continuation trade. So what we're looking for specifically is the price action to test into that. We want to see it put in a distinct high on the retest, right? And then we're looking for continuation to the downside. So let's watch the tape as we get in here and watch the price action unfold and see if we can see a distinct, clear failure on the test. Okay, we have that. So now our stop can go right above the highs of that candle. And we can look for the first close away, which we have right here. And we can take that trade to the downside. Now, the rules are that our initial exit would be right here at the low of the range. But the reality is, let's look at what happened. We had this entire range that set up. We can think of it as a range break trade or a consolidation breakout trade. And we can look for 2 times the height of that range as our exit. So we're getting like insane risk to reward if we're taking that second chance with our stop right here and our entry right here. We're still getting really good risk to reward if we enter the trade here with our stop up here because we're still looking for 2 to 1. These are different trades, but they're both really valid trades, and it truly depends on how aggressive you want to be with your trading. We're seeing this continuation, and this is giving us a guide as far as where we should be taking our exits. Again, we're thinking about this range, right? Whoa, there we go. So that's where we'll take our exit. We had a really distinct move that went 2 times the height of the range that was there. That is a really good, straightforward 2 to 1 range trade. When you get a breakout of a range, the most simple way to do it is look for a 2 to 1. Let's talk about the next trade because we're already setting up the next trade. The next technical analysis component that we're going to talk about is extension. So we just covered what ranges are. Now we're going to define extensions. Extensions and overextensions are just a measure of the distance traveled over the time. So this is a minute chart. So we're looking at how quickly did this distance travel in the time that it took. We were consolidating for a pretty significant period of time. And this entire distance, twice the distance of the height, was traveled 20% of the entire time of that consolidation. That's a pretty fast, sustained move. Because of that, we can look for maybe a failure and some sort of retracement. We actually get this as it's setting up right there. Did you notice how we tried to break down and we put in what's called a double bottom? That's actually a bottoming pattern. And when we have that extension combined with a pattern, we have a low put in, we have a move up, we have another low put in, and then when we break what's called the neckline right here, we can enter our trade long. Our stop would be below the entire low of the move, right there, and we're targeting at least a 1-to-1. This isn't a super high probability trade. This is a very straightforward fade trade though. So when we get our 1-to-1 target right up into here, which happens to be another thing where we're running into, okay, we take our exit. That's it. That's the whole trade. We combine the extension component with a price action component. We wait for the neckline to get broken. We take our trade and we look for a 1-to-1. So we're skipping forward and we're looking at what's occurring again. And we've seen the same setup occur where it's this range that's forming. And we've got a range that's conformed by the horizontal trend line on the top and the horizontal trend line on the bottom. We're seeing buyers step in every time it comes down to the lows and sellers step in every time it tests the highs of the range. People will say, oh, look, there's a triangle, and I guess that is true. We could look for the break of that, and if you take that trade, you have a really nice, again, break and retest of that, and then we would look for a move up here. Your stop would go below the low of the triangle, and you would be targeting price action coming right up here. The challenge with this trade is, and it is a tricky one, it's because it's in the middle of congestion. It's in the middle of all of this range. We call this stuck in range or midpoint. This is basically midpoint. So could it work? Yeah, but is it a high probability trade? No. If you took this exact same setup, this exact same price action right here, and you put this at the high of the day or the low of the day, it would be a much higher probability trade. But when it's stuck in all of this nonsense, all the up and down, it's stuck in the middle of this entire range, you have a super tricky trade. And think about it from the perspective of the participants involved. You have traders on both sides here who were in from the lows or in from the highs, and they're going to cause all this havoc in the price action. So it becomes really, really difficult to actually look for a clean move. This is one of the key principles of any technical analysis is you want to avoid mid-range trading. And the reason why you want to avoid mid-range trading is simply because mid-range patterns are more prone to failure. When it's mid-range and it's choppy like this, it's really, really difficult to get an accurate read, and you can be fodder for, unfortunately, the market makers that are going to push it in both directions, stop people out of their position, and then rebid. There's the old expression, if it doesn't scare you out, it's going to wear you out. The reality is it's probably something to avoid entirely. But let's see what happens when we come up into this resistance area, right? We have this clearly defined resistance area. And again, we have our clearly defined support area. We're talking about a range here. It looks like we're going to break out of that, right? So are we going to take that range break trade? Well, let's look at the difference from this, the price action moving up in this side versus the way the price action moved on the prior range break. When we're looking at technical analysis, you could say, yes, these are both range break trades. But when we study the price action and the way the range broke, when we study the price action and we look at the strength that led into that, we recognize that this range, either it's going to work really well or it's going to fail. And the reality is this is more prone to fail when it's come a long way into it. Think about the energy that it's used to get to that point. from the low of the range to the high of the range very, very quickly. When we look at what happened previously, it was very methodical. It was like that momentum, that supply was kind of building and building and building. And then finally, when the range broke, it really broke. This was almost chasing. So it went right up to the highs of the range. So that's something that you always need to be aware of. It is more prone to failure when it goes a long distance fast. You actually want to see what's called a running break, which that running break is usually 3 or 4 candles that just kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then break. As the price action fails, you could actually take a failed breakout trade here. The failed breakout trade would be once you get a close below that range, you would be stop above the high of that range. Why? Because the stop would tell us it is placed based on where the sellers wouldn't let it get higher. Our entry would be as soon as the bar breaks the low of this little tiny range, right? This range is built out. We would be looking for it to fail and then go to the other side of the range at least. And we see how fast it went up and we see how fast it comes down. That's a failed breakout trade or a failed range break trade. You want to be as close on entry as you possibly can be. You want your stop to be just above the highs, and you always want to target the other side of the range.
크게 어려운 내용은 아니었죠? 오늘 영상에서 본 내용들은 실제로도 지가 매일매일 활용하는 것들이에요. 요것들만 확실하게 이해하고 있어도 상위 10% 안에 들어가는 트레이더가 될 것이라 지는 생각해요. 하지만 개념 이해가 됐더라도 실제 매매를 하다 보면은 여러 변수들과 문제들에 부딪히게 될 텐데요. 요런 개념들을 바탕으로 실전에서도 잘 활용할 수 있도록 지가 운영하는 공부방에서는 매매 노하우와 실제 수익으로 이어지는 좋은 타점의 관점들을 실시간으로 우리 구독자님들과 함께 공유하고 있는데요. 저의 관점과 다른 분들의 관점을 함께 공유하며 꾸준하게 차트 공부를 하다 보면은 스스로 수익을 만들어낼 수 있는 기술을 터득하게 되실 거예요. 혼자서는 매매가 어렵거나 지와 함께 공부하면서 안정적인 수익을 맹글어가길 희망하시는 분들은 영상 더보기에 있는 상담 채팅방으로 말씀 주셔요. 그럼 지는 오늘도 고생했으니까 불고기나 묵으러 가야겠쇼. 우린 다음 영상에서 만나는 거요.